In 2023, a 34-year-old man died from alcohol withdrawal. He'd been a heavy drinker for years and decided to quit cold turkey. Within 48 hours, his brain, so adapted to alcohol's presence, went into seizures. His heart stopped. Meanwhile, in the same year, 0 people died from cannabis withdrawal. Not because weed is harmless, but because the two substances operate on completely different levels of your biology. And yet, one of them is legal almost everywhere. The other can still land you in prison. So which one is actually worse for you? The answer isn't as simple as you think. And the science might surprise you. Let's start with what each substance actually does to your brain. When you drink alcohol, it floods your system with GABA, your brain's main calm-down neurotransmitter. That's the relaxation, the lowered inhibitions, the social lubrication. But alcohol also suppresses glutamate, the neurotransmitter responsible for excitability and energy. So you're simultaneously hitting the brakes and cutting the engine. The result? Slowed reaction time, impaired judgment, memory blackouts. And if you drink enough, respiratory depression. Your brain literally forgets to tell your lungs to breathe. Cannabis works differently. THC, the main psychoactive compound, binds to your cannabinoid receptors, particularly CB1 receptors concentrated in your brain. These receptors are part of your endocannabinoid system, which naturally regulates mood, appetite, pain, and memory. When THC activates these receptors, you get the high, altered perception, relaxation, euphoria, increased appetite, and yes, short-term memory impairment. But here's a key difference. There's no lethal dose of THC that we've ever been able to establish in humans. Your brainstem, the part controlling breathing and heart function, has almost no cannabinoid receptors. You can overdose on alcohol. You cannot, in any practical sense, overdose on cannabis. That's not the same as saying cannabis is safe. But it's an important distinction most people don't understand. Now let's talk about what each one does to your body over time. Alcohol is metabolized by your liver into acetaldehyde, a toxic compound that damages cells. Chronic drinking leads to fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, and eventually liver failure. But alcohol doesn't stop at your liver. It damages your stomach lining, leading to ulcers and gastritis. It weakens your heart muscle, causing cardiomyopathy. It increases your risk of at least 7 types of cancer, including breast, liver, and colorectal cancer. The World Health Organization classifies alcohol as a Group 1 carcinogen. That's the same category as tobacco and asbestos. And here's something most people don't realize. There's no safe amount of alcohol when it comes to cancer risk. Even moderate drinking increases your risk. Cannabis has a different physical profile. If you smoke it, you're inhaling combusted plant material, which does irritate your lungs. Chronic heavy smokers may experience bronchitis and respiratory issues. But here's the strange part. Unlike tobacco, cannabis has never been conclusively linked to lung cancer. Multiple large-scale studies have failed to find the connection, despite researchers expecting to find one. Some theories suggest cannabinoids may have anti-tumor properties that offset the carcinogenic effects of smoke, though this is still being researched. If you consume cannabis through edibles, vaporizers, or other methods, you bypass lung irritation entirely. However, cannabis isn't physically harmless. Heavy use is associated with increased heart rate and, in rare cases, can trigger cardiovascular events in people with pre-existing conditions. The honest comparison? Alcohol causes significantly more documented physical damage across more organ systems than cannabis. That's not opinion. That's the research. But physical damage isn't the whole story. Let's talk about addiction. Alcohol is one of the most addictive substances on the planet. Approximately 10 to 15% of people who drink regularly will develop alcohol use disorder. And alcohol withdrawal can kill you. It's one of only 2 common substances, along with benzodiazepines, where withdrawal itself can be fatal. Seizures, delirium tremens, cardiac arrest. That's why medical supervision is often required for severe alcohol detox. Cannabis is addictive too, but differently. About 9% of cannabis users develop cannabis use disorder. For those who start as teenagers, that number rises to about 17%. But cannabis withdrawal, while uncomfortable, is not dangerous. Irritability, sleep problems, decreased appetite, cravings. These are real, but they won't kill you. The psychological dependence, however, can be significant. Heavy users often report using cannabis to manage anxiety, boredom, or emotional discomfort. When they stop, those underlying issues come flooding back, sometimes worse than before. This is where cannabis gets tricky. It can become an emotional crutch that prevents you from developing healthy coping mechanisms. Now here's where things get controversial. Let's talk about your brain, specifically long-term cognitive effects. Chronic heavy alcohol use shrinks your brain. Literally, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and planning, is particularly vulnerable. Long-term alcoholics show measurable deficits in memory, attention, and executive function. Some of this damage is reversible with sustained sobriety. Some of it isn't. Alcohol also disrupts neurogenesis, the creation of new brain cells, particularly in the hippocampus, your memory center. Cannabis has cognitive effects too, but they're more nuanced. In adults, most research suggests that cognitive impairment from cannabis is largely acute, meaning it happens while you're high and shortly after, but resolves with abstinence. However, and this is critical, for adolescents, the picture is very different. The teenage brain is still developing. The prefrontal cortex doesn't fully mature until around age 25. Heavy cannabis use during this window has been linked to lower IQ scores in some studies, impaired memory and attention, potential disruption of brain development. Some researchers believe these effects may be partially permanent. Others argue the correlation might be explained by other factors: poverty, trauma, other substance use. The science isn't fully settled, but the concern is legitimate. If there's one clear public health message, it's this. Teenagers should avoid both substances, but cannabis may pose unique developmental risks that adults don't face. Let's talk about mental health. Alcohol is a depressant, and while it might feel like it relieves anxiety in the moment, chronic use makes anxiety and depression significantly worse. Alcohol disrupts sleep architecture, even if it helps you fall asleep faster. Poor sleep worsens mood disorders. A vicious cycle emerges. Among people with depression, alcohol use doubles the suicide risk. Cannabis and mental health is more complicated. For some people, cannabis relieves anxiety and provides genuine therapeutic benefit. CBD, in particular, has shown promise for anxiety disorders in clinical research. But for others, especially those predisposed to psychotic disorders, cannabis can be a trigger. Heavy cannabis use, particularly high THC strains, is associated with increased risk of psychosis and may accelerate the onset of schizophrenia in vulnerable individuals. This isn't everyone. Most people who use cannabis will never experience psychosis. But if you have a family history of schizophrenic disorders, cannabis is a legitimate risk factor. The relationship is dose-dependent. Higher THC, more frequent use, earlier age of onset, all increase risk. So which is worse for mental health? It depends entirely on your individual brain chemistry, predispositions, and patterns of use. Now let's talk about something people don't discuss enough: what these substances do to your behavior and relationships. Alcohol disinhibits. It removes the filters that keep you from saying or doing things you'd normally suppress. Sometimes that's harmless. You're just more social, more fun. But sometimes it's catastrophic. Alcohol is involved in approximately 40% of violent crimes. Domestic violence rates skyrocket when alcohol is involved. Sexual assault, bar fights, road rage incidents. Alcohol is a through line. And drunk driving kills over 10,000 people per year in the United States alone. Cannabis affects behavior differently. It tends to make people more passive, more introspective, more sedentary. Aggression rates do not increase with cannabis intoxication. If anything, they decrease. That doesn't mean stoned driving is safe. Reaction time and attention are impaired. But the risk profile is different from alcohol. Studies suggest driving under the influence of cannabis roughly doubles your crash risk. Driving drunk increases your crash risk by approximately 13 times. Both are dangerous. One is dramatically more dangerous. As for relationships, cannabis can create its own problems. Motivation loss, emotional blunting, a partner who's always checked out. These damage relationships differently than alcohol, but they do cause damage. So where does this leave us? If you're asking which substance causes more total harm to society, more deaths, more disease, more violence, more broken families, the answer is unambiguous. Alcohol, by a wide margin. A landmark 2010 study published in The Lancet ranked 20 substances by overall harm. Alcohol came in first. More harmful than heroin. More harmful than crack cocaine. Cannabis ranked 8th. But here's the nuance that matters. Individual harm depends on individual use patterns, biology, and circumstances. A person who drinks 1 glass of wine per week is probably at lower risk than someone who smokes cannabis daily from age 15. A person genetically predisposed to psychosis should probably avoid cannabis entirely. A person with a family history of alcoholism should be extremely cautious with drinking. Context matters. Dose matters. Age matters. Genetics matter. So what's the actual answer? Neither substance is good for you in the way that exercise or vegetables are good for you. Both carry real risks. Both can be used in lower-risk ways. Both can spiral into dependency that damages your health, relationships, and potential. If you're going to use either one, here's the harm reduction truth. For alcohol, less is always better. There's no health benefit that outweighs the risks. If you drink, keep it minimal and never drive. For cannabis, if you're over 25, the risks are lower. Avoid high THC concentrates. Don't use it as your only coping mechanism. And if you have any personal or family history of psychotic disorders, it may not be worth the risk. The question isn't really which is better. The better question is, what are you using it for? What are you avoiding? And is there a healthier way to get what you're actually seeking? Because often the substance isn't the answer. It's the thing you reach for when you don't have one.